Hello, friends. Today I want to tell you about a woman who did something that even the most hardened Soviet defectors thought was impossible. She was born inside the Kremlin. She grew up with Stalin kissing her goodnight. And in 1967, at the age of 41, she walked into the American embassy in New Delhi and asked for asylum. Her name was Svetlana Alliluyeva. She was Joseph Stalin's daughter. And her escape was not just a geopolitical earthquake. It was the final rejection of a man who had loved her more than he had loved anyone else in his life, and who had destroyed her anyway. This is a story about what it costs to be loved by a tyrant. It is a story about identity and inheritance, and the impossibility of separating yourself from your father when your father is one of the most murderous men in human history. And it is a story about a woman who spent 50 years trying to become someone other than Stalin's daughter, and never quite succeeding. Let's go. Svetlana Yosifovna Alliluyeva was born on February 28, 1926, in Moscow. She was the third and last child of Joseph Stalin and Nadezhda Alliluyeva. Her mother was 34 years younger than her father. Her mother was also already broken by the time Svetlana was born. Nadezhda had married Stalin when she was 16 years old. She had believed in the revolution. She had believed in him. And by the time their daughter arrived, she had learned that the revolution devoured its children, and that Stalin devoured everyone. Svetlana grew up inside the Kremlin walls. She had private tutors. She had servants. She had access to food when millions were starving. She also had a father who adored her with an intensity that frightened the people around him. Stalin called her his little sparrow. He called her his little housekeeper. He carried her photograph in his wallet. He wrote her letters when he was away, tender letters, letters that used diminutives and affection in a way that nobody who knew him politically would have recognized. He loved her, and that love was real. And that love was also conditional in ways she would not understand until it was far too late. Here is what you need to understand about Stalin and Svetlana. He loved her because she was small and dependent and had not yet learned to see him clearly. He loved her because she reminded him of her mother before her mother started looking at him with disgust. He loved her because she was the last person in his life who did not yet fear him. And then her mother killed herself. It was November 9th, 1932. Svetlana was 6 years old. Nadezhda Alliluyeva shot herself in the heart with a small pistol that had been given to her as a gift by her brother. The official story was that she had died of appendicitis. The whispered story was that she had argued with Stalin at a Kremlin dinner party the night before, that he had humiliated her in front of the other wives, that he had flicked a cigarette at her across the table. The truth was that Nadezhda had been carrying a kind of despair that could not be named in Stalin's Soviet Union, because to name it was to indict the revolution itself. She left a suicide note. Stalin read it once and never spoke of it again. The note was burned. They did not tell Svetlana the truth. They told her that her mother had died suddenly. They told her it was an illness. Svetlana did not learn that her mother had killed herself until she was a teenager, and by then the lie had already done its work. It had taught her that the people she loved would vanish without explanation. It had taught her that her father's version of events was the only version that mattered. It had taught her to live inside a world where truth was negotiable. After Nadezhda's death, Stalin became even more obsessed with his daughter. He kept her close. He monitored her friendships. He decided what she would study. He decided who she could see. And when she turned 16 and fell in love for the first time, he destroyed it. Now let's talk about Stalin and Svetlana. Because the relationship between them was not just about control. It was not just about propaganda. It was real. And it was complicated. And you need to understand it to understand everything that came after. Stalin was capable of extraordinary tenderness toward his daughter. He took her to his dacha. He let her sit at the table during dinners with Politburo members. He gave her gifts. He asked her about her schoolwork. He called her Satanka, a diminutive so intimate that nobody else was allowed to use it. and all of that affection was genuine. The problem was that it was also a leash. When Svetlana was 16, she fell in love with a Jewish screenwriter named Alexei Kapler. He was 40 years old. He was cultured and sophisticated and everything that Stalin was not. He introduced Svetlana to foreign films. He gave her books. He wrote her poetry. And Stalin found out. Stalin did not argue with his daughter. He did not explain. He had Kapler arrested and sent to the Gulag for 10 years. He told Svetlana that Kapler was a British spy. He told her that she had been deceived. He told her that he had saved her. And then he slapped her across the face so hard that she fell to the floor. This was the bargain. Stalin would love her as long as she remained his. The moment she tried to become someone separate, someone with her own desires, someone who might leave him, the love would curdle into punishment. And Svetlana learned the lesson. She learned to bury her wants. She learned to perform compliance. She learned that love from Stalin was a form of imprisonment, and that imprisonment was the price of survival. Kapler survived the Gulag. Barely. He was released after 10 years and sent into internal exile. Svetlana never saw him again. She tried to build a life anyway. She married young. She married a man named Grigory Morozov, the son of a Jewish tailor. Stalin refused to meet him. Stalin told his daughter that she could marry whomever she wanted, but that he would never allow a Jew into his home. Svetlana married him anyway. They had a son. They named him Joseph, after Stalin. The marriage lasted 3 years. It was doomed from the beginning. How do you build a life with someone when your father is Joseph Stalin, and he has made it clear that your husband is beneath acknowledgement? She married again, this time to Yuri Zhdanov, the son of Andrei Zhdanov, one of Stalin's closest associates. This marriage had Stalin's approval. It was a Kremlin marriage. It was also loveless. They had a daughter. They named her Yekaterina. The marriage lasted 5 years. Svetlana spent those years watching her father grow older and more paranoid, and more willing to destroy even the people who had served him for decades. She watched the doctor's plot unfold. She watched Stalin prepare another purge. She watched him become a man who trusted no one, not even her. And then, on March 5th, 1953, Stalin died. He died of a stroke at his dacha outside Moscow. Svetlana was there. She was one of the last people to see him alive. She later described watching her father die as watching a small, sick old man struggle for breath, while the men around him stood frozen, afraid to help, afraid to touch him, afraid that any action they took might later be used against them. She held his hand. He opened his eyes once, looked around the room, and raised his left hand as if he were cursing everyone present. Then he died. Svetlana was 27 years old. For the first time in her life, she was not Stalin's daughter in his presence. She was Stalin's daughter in his absence. And the absence was worse. The Soviet state canonized Stalin immediately. His body was embalmed and placed next to Lenin in the mausoleum on Red Square. Pravda published tributes. The party declared him the greatest leader in Soviet history. And Svetlana was expected to perform grief publicly while processing something far more complicated privately. She had loved him. She had also been suffocated by him. She had mourned him. She had also been relieved when he died. And she could not say any of that out loud, because to say it was to betray the state narrative. And the state narrative was now all she had left of him. She tried to disappear. She took her mother's maiden name, Alliluyeva, and stopped using Stalin. She moved out of the Kremlin. She worked as a teacher and a translator. She tried to live quietly. But you cannot live quietly when you are Joseph Stalin's daughter. The KGB monitored her constantly. Her friendships were scrutinized. Her romantic relationships were reported. Her children were watched. She was not a person. She was a symbol. And the symbol belonged to the state. In 1963, Svetlana fell in love again. His name was Brajesh Singh. He was an Indian communist who had come to Moscow for medical treatment. He was dying of emphysema. Svetlana nursed him. She fell in love with him. She wanted to marry him. The Soviet authorities refused to allow it. They told her that a marriage to a foreigner would be a propaganda disaster. They told her that her duty was to the Soviet Union. They told her that she could see him, but she could not marry him. Brajesh Singh died in Moscow in October 1966. Svetlana was devastated. She asked for permission to take his ashes to India so that they could be scattered in the Ganges according to his family's wishes. The authorities granted the request. They thought it was a small gesture. They thought she would return. She did not return. On March 6, 1967, exactly 14 years and 1 day after her father's death, Svetlana Alliluyeva walked into the United States Embassy in New Delhi and asked for political asylum. She told the diplomats who met her that she could not go back. She told them that she wanted to live in the West. She told them that she was tired of being Joseph Stalin's daughter in a country that still worshipped Joseph Stalin. The Americans were stunned. This was the height of the Cold War. This was the daughter of the man who had ruled the Soviet Union for nearly 30 years. This was a propaganda gift so vast that the CIA initially thought it might be a trap. They debated for hours. They contacted Washington. They ran background checks. And then they said yes. Svetlana left India 2 weeks later. She flew to Rome. She held a press conference. She renounced her Soviet citizenship. She said that she was defecting not because she hated the Soviet people, but because she could no longer live in a system that had stolen her ability to be a private person. She said that she wanted to be free. And then she flew to Switzerland, and then to the United States. The Soviet response was immediate and vicious. Pravda published editorials calling her a traitor. The government released statements saying she had been brainwashed by Western intelligence agencies. Her son, Joseph, was forced to publicly disown her. Her daughter, Yekaterina, was forbidden from speaking her mother's name. The state erased Svetlana from the official narrative. She became a non-person. She became proof that even blood loyalty meant nothing when weighed against the needs of the party. And Svetlana tried to build a new life. She arrived in the United States in April 1967. She was given asylum. She was given a new name. She wrote a memoir. The book was called 20 Letters to a Friend, and it became an international bestseller. She made money. She gave interviews. She told the world what it had been like to grow up as Stalin's daughter. She told them about the affection and the violence. She told them about her mother's suicide. She told them about Kapler and the slap, and the marriages that had failed because her father's shadow was too long. She told them everything, and it was not enough. Because here's the thing about trying to escape your father, when your father is Joseph Stalin. You can leave the country. You can change your name. You can write the memoir. You can tell the truth. And people will still only see you as Stalin's daughter. They will still ask you the same questions. They will still expect you to explain him. They will still treat you as a living relic of a man you spent your whole life trying to escape. Svetlana moved constantly. She lived in Princeton. She lived in California. She moved to England. She married an American architect named William Peters. The marriage lasted less than 2 years. She converted to Christianity. She moved back to the Soviet Union briefly in 1984 because she missed her children. The Soviet authorities welcomed her back with propaganda fanfare and then placed her under surveillance again. She left again 18 months later. She moved to Soviet Georgia. She moved back to America. She moved to a care home in Wisconsin. She never stopped running, and she never stopped being Stalin's daughter. I have been thinking about what Svetlana's story means, because the obvious reading is that this is a story about defection. A woman escapes a totalitarian state and finds freedom in the West. And that reading is real, but it is not the whole thing. The whole thing is simpler and more human than that. Svetlana Alliluyeva spent her entire life trying to answer a question that has no answer. How do you separate yourself from a father who destroyed millions of people? How do you carry that name? How do you live with the knowledge that the man who called you his little sparrow also signed execution lists with your photograph in his pocket? How do you grieve someone who loved you and also made it impossible for you to ever be anyone other than his daughter? And the answer is that you cannot, not completely. Svetlana's defection was not an escape, it was an attempt at escape. And the attempt mattered. It mattered because she tried. It mattered because she refused to perform the role the Soviet state had written for her. It mattered because she told the truth about her father in a way that cost her everything she had left: her children, her country, her ability to ever go home. She died on November 22, 2011, in Richland Center, Wisconsin. She was 85 years old. She died in a care home, far from Moscow, far from the Kremlin, far from the dacha where her father had kissed her goodnight. She died under the name Lana Peters, the name she had taken from her brief marriage to the American architect. She had spent the last years of her life trying to be invisible. She had spent the last years of her life trying to be anyone other than Stalin's daughter. She never succeeded, but she tried, and the trying matters. Because Svetlana Alliluyeva's story is not just about Stalin. It is about what happens to the children of monsters. It is about inheritance and guilt and the impossible weight of a name you did not choose. It is about love that destroys the people it claims to protect. And it is about a woman who refused to let her father's legacy be the only story told about her life, even though that refusal cost her everything, even though the world never quite let her be anyone else. Stalin loved his daughter more than he loved the Soviet Union, and his daughter escaped to America. And she spent the rest of her life processing what that love had cost her. Thank you for being here for this one. Svetlana's story is one that I think deserves more attention than it usually gets. Not as a Cold War curiosity, not as a propaganda footnote, but as a human story about a woman who tried to escape the inescapable. If this story reached you, hit the like button. Subscribe if you are not already here, and leave a comment. Tell me what you think about Svetlana, about whether it is possible to ever truly escape your father's shadow when your father is Joseph Stalin. See you in the next one.